George Kryle's book was like a bolt out of the blue. I thought this is this kind of like brand new thing. We have something that has never been discussed before. How can we turn it into a film that was going to be approachable, that it was going to be the type of movie that people would actually choose to see?
It took George Cryle 10 years to write the book. We didn't have quite as much time as that, but we did have the book to guide us.
Yeah, that's an Aaron Sorkin scene.
Charlie Wilson's War is the only writing assignment I've ever gone after. I read the book, and I called my agent to see if he could get me a meeting with Gary Getzman and Tom Hanks, and in a rare display of bad judgment, they hired me to write the movie.
You better be on your toes when you get into a story meeting with Aaron Sorkin. This is a really sharp writer, really quick-witted, and good dancer, too.
Aaron Sorkin immediately took to the concept of the book and delivered as crackerjack a screenplay loaded with, his brand of superb dialogue. It always read like a house on fire.
It is a great representation of who Aaron Sorkin kind of is, in a way, this deep study of contrasts and politics and wit and intellect.
We'll just say I like drinking women and chasing whiskey, and the speaker felt we were underrepresented.
One man, one vote.
Exactly.
I enjoyed writing the movie very much, and then really began to love it when Mike Nichols came on board.
Such a brilliant guy and has such an original point of view.
He was a name that I grew up with and a presence that I grew up with. He was simply in a class by himself.
You find out Mike Nichols is interested in doing the film. This speaks volumes, because all you think of is The Graduate. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Catch-22.
You don't say no to Mike Nichols, you just don't. He's just a fascinating kind of guy. I mean, he knows a frightening amount about a lot.
He's probably the most well-informed person that you can have a conversation with. So his frame of reference is about 1,000 times what mine is.
He's one of the great artists we have, and so a guy like me coming up in my career, getting a chance to work with Mike, it's just, a gift.
Charlie Wilson's War is a great story that we've never heard before. Charlie is a wonderfully funny, brilliant, flawed hero who put together this war, and nobody's ever heard of him. It was the biggest covert war in U.S. history.
I had never heard of this guy, Charlie Wilson. The only thing I knew is that the Soviet Union had been defeated in Afghanistan, and this was, how many years ago?
It's the 80s, so I was junior high.
I didn't know anything about anything or anyone, and I was horrified that I didn't.
I wasn't quite aware of the international events of the covert operations of our country in Afghanistan, no, sorry to say.
But I think I was not alone in that, so I was glad to discover that I just wasn't completely out of the loop on who these people were.
He, together with an equally colorful CIA operative named Gustav Ricados, along with Joanne Herring, an ultra-right-wing anti-communist, the sixth wealthiest woman in Texas, they engineered the funding, the training, and the arming of the Afghan Mujahideen in their effort to get the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. One of the really bizarre parts of the story was that historical enemies, simply for the purpose of getting the communists, worked together even though they hated working together. Pakistan and Afghanistan did not at this time recognize Israel's right to exist, yet Israel was their second biggest supplier of weapons after the United States. Well, Charlie in the 80s was a Democratic congressman from Texas and was extremely scandal-prone.
He told us point blank at the very beginning, I don't care if you show me drunk, doing drugs, womanizing, because he did it.
So one wouldn't expect that that he'd be responsible for one of the great turning points of the 20th century.
He does not pretend to be anything that he's not. Charlie's great strength, I think, as a politician, is his lack of hypocrisy.
After you hang out with him and talk to him, you see why he had the amount of friends and liaisons that he had at that time, not only with women, but with people in Congress and everything, because he just has a way about him, a certain very genuine way about him.
The exterior of Good Time Charlie, of the party guy, really was misleading. Underneath, he was an extremely thoughtful, very wise, very smart, very patriotic man.
So despite all his mistakes or foibles or things that happened back at that time, the flaws of his character, it just wasn't enough to overcome just the genuine big-hearted nature of him as a man.
He's a great guy and a man's man, and my character sometimes gets frustrated with his ways, but can't help adoring him and loving working for him.
And then there's Tom Hanks. The only thing I love more than working with Tom is just hanging out with Tom.
I have to remind myself that he is Charlie and I am Bonnie and not Tom and Amy because, you know, Amy would never be so bold with Mr. Hanks.
They're not ultra right-wing.
Then what are they? He's so easy to work with, and he just makes you feel so comfortable.
Well, they're ultra right-wing.
I have to remind myself not to laugh. What are you doing hanging around this woman?
We could have carried it on through. It would have been different.
He's so brilliant at playing complicated people. Tom was a comedian.
Big shot.
The comic has a very special relationship with the audience.
Let's go! Yeah, come on, everybody. Wave those napkins a few times. There we go. There we go.
The comic is basically somebody who hears what people are thinking. And it's something that makes sure you're unsentimental. It's something that makes sure you're accurate.
I think the tone that he created in this movie is inconceivable. The tone of the center of this movie is just kind of something so delicate and impossible that he's done.
Julia is very funny.
Now listen, where the did you go?
She's gorgeous and she's so much fun.
Ow! He goosed me.
And we love her smile, but a lot of the time she's funny.
Well, I believe Joanne approached me in about 1981. I had already taken notice of the Afghan war, and I had doubled the appropriation for the CIA to supply the Mujahideen with weapons. Joanne actually persuaded me to go to Afghanistan and to take a look myself because she was desperately trying to get someone interested.
Charlie and I kind of had a crush on each other, sort of a teenage crush. But what we really found out was the only thing we had in common was the war. I think that a hand greater than ours had been at work a long time to give us these contacts. And so we just put them together, and we were really a good team.
Joanne is unique, and she is on the social scene in Houston a lot.
Well, she's lovely. She has all the social graces, and she's dressed impeccably.
It does seem a little odd that someone, for lack of a better word, a socialite like Joanne, that this would be a passion for her, but it was.
She's just so enigmatic and energetic. She walks into a room, she's a very bright light.
Well, you're a handsome devil.
Hey!
So it's intriguing to be that person and to try to pull that off as a complete, true human being.
She was outraged about the Soviet atrocities that were taking place in Afghanistan. And she also was concerned on a strategic sense about the expansion of the Soviet Union.
Charlie was fascinated by her power and her passion, by her interest, her commitment to this.
She really is a contrast study in every way. I think she likes keeping people on their toes and having people go, she does what? She accomplished what?
Very persuasive. I often say that to people that ask me why I did it in the first place, I ask them if they ever tried saying no to Joanne.
I love my scenes with Philip. I just love Philip. You know, he's just so...
I've been an admirer of Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's one of the finest actors that have come down the pike.
It was fun to just sort of toy with him in that Joanne way.
This was at a time in the mid-'80s when the CIA was made up almost entirely of Ivy Leaguers. It was a group that came out of Princeton. They were old school, and Gust was exactly the opposite. He was the son of a blue-collar, hardworking immigrant from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. He was a hardscrabble guy. He was a street guy. He was a great CIA agent, but was constantly being shoved to the margins because he didn't have the CIA style. Gus, like Charlie, was a passionate supporter of the Afghan Mujahideen, a very passionate hater of communists. and was Charlie's other half.
Well, I think people are very reluctant to believe that we can assist change so powerfully as an individual, which I think these three people demonstrate perfectly.
The idea that these characters, their liabilities as people, are the things that actually become their assets and help them actually do what they do. And I found it very interesting because they're very colorful, eccentric, kind of wearing their flaws on their sleeves kinds of people. And those are the things that actually help them.
I just think it's fascinating how they all really find a true purpose in what they're trying to accomplish.
They were successful. The Afghans beat the Soviets, the only time the Red Army had ever been defeated. And in so doing, that was the first domino that fell in the end of the Soviet Union, in the end of communism, in the end of the Cold War.
He wanted the importance of the freedom that he wanted to bring to the Afghan people, the injustices that were going on, and the suffering in the refugee camps in Peshawar.
And that was an experience that will always be seared in my memory, was going through those hospitals and seeing, especially the children with their hands blown off from the mines that the Soviets were dropping from their helicopters.
He wanted to defeat the evil Soviet empire, and he did it through a sheer dint of a brand of hard work that might not even be occurring in politics today.
I left those hospitals determined that as long as I had a breath in my body and was a member of Congress, that I was going to do what I could to make the Soviets pay for what they were doing.
One of the things that I go back to all the time is transformation in a person. It's sort of the point. And transformation is one of the great subjects from plays and movies. I think what I'd like for the audience to get out of this is for them to be reminded that you can make a difference, that people do make a difference. It's not over. The possibility of what we call making a difference still exists. One of the things that I really would love to have done was to see the early Charlie with his big 10-gallon hat and driving the convertible, actually yelling, "Yeehaw."
He had some brand of attraction and charm that was undeniable.
He was a character described as larger than life, also described as one of the only guys ever known that could strut while sitting down.
He's an impressive physical specimen. You know, he's very tall. He's got that, he's got a big, massive voice. He's got all the Texas stuff that goes along with him, the belt buckles and the suspenders and the cowboy boots. And he's also incredibly charming. He came in, and every single woman in the office said, "Oh, Charlie, he's got something." He's very sure of himself, and he exudes a huge amount of confidence, which is attractive, which is sexy, which is in fact admirable. He told us point blank at the very beginning, "I don't care how you portray me. I don't care what you show me doing. I don't care if you show me drunk."
Well, first of all, I plead guilty to all the sins that you mentioned, the whiskey and the girls and all those things. And I've, possibly because of advanced age, I have cleaned up my act. But I don't regret any of that. As a matter of fact, Gus always thought that it was, and he said after it was over, that it was the best cover he had ever seen, because the Soviets that were following Congress just absolutely didn't take me seriously. And that turned out to not be smart on their part.
Charlie was one of those lawmakers on the Hill that had never been taken very seriously. He'll tell you himself that he had a congressional district where nobody much needed anything. All they wanted their churches and their guns and to be left alone. So Charlie had no trouble getting reelected, but the core of thinkers in Washington would classify him as one of the 25 least effective congressmen at any particular time.
He was very well liked, and he was able to make a lot of deals with other congressmen and committees and say, "Hey, I'll give you this if you give me that." And he became very influential and was very well liked. He was fair. He never promised anything he couldn't deliver. He treated everybody as he does now. He's so much of a gentleman. He's such a kind man. He doesn't attack anything or anyone. He's careful. He might look askance, he might raise an eyebrow, he might question, but he's just not that kind of guy. Charlie Wilson is the only politician I've ever met, with the possible exception of Castro, who is in the moment and is not pre-recorded.
And I love sticking it to the Russians. And I think most Americans do. They need to get it back, and they're getting it back.
He's talking about right now, and he answers your questions right out of his head. He doesn't have anything ready.
But after they made the decision to fight to the end, no matter what they had, then I said we just simply can't allow people this brave and this deserving to sell their lives cheaply.
He wanted to defeat the evil Soviet empire. He wanted to bring freedom to the Afghan people.
They're digging in for the last stand at Gardez, and they're going to lose. And I love it.
The first time I heard it, his name was from a fellow named Abdul Rahim, who was a prominent spokesman for the Mujahideen, who told me Charlie Wilson was the most important man in Congress for us fighting this war. That's the first time I heard about him, and then I began to learn more.
600 Afghan guerrillas go back to war inside Afghanistan.
Afghans were saying, "You Americans are so crazy. Why do you think they want Afghanistan? There's no oil. There's no money. There's no manufacturing here. They don't want us. They want Pakistan, and they want to be able to fly to the Straits of Hormuz. And when they can fly to the Straits of Hormuz, and your oil is cut off, the United States ignored this threat because there was such an involvement in the Iran-Contra situation. Jimmy Carter had been saying that it was a tribal war. So we went to Afghanistan. We have film of it. We came back. We showed it to everybody that we possibly could. And we showed it to Charlie, God bless him.
Joanne persuaded me to go to Afghanistan and to take a look myself because she was desperately trying to get someone interested in it. So she deserves a lot of credit. That was an experience that will always be seared in my memory, was going through those hospitals and seeing especially the children with their hands blown off from the mines that the Soviets were dropping from their helicopters.
And this was hard work. It wasn't going to be all that easy.
That was perhaps the deciding thing, and it made a huge difference for the next 10 or 12 years of my life, because I left those hospitals determined that as long as I had a breath in my body and was a member of Congress, that I was going to do what I could to make the Soviets pay for what they were doing.
He gave blood when he was in the camps. He got with the people. He made friends with people that are still his friends. Charlie is not a person who pulls rank at all, or even feels that he has any rank. He never pretended to be anyone other than he was.
Thank you, Elaine. I usually don't get waited on quite that way.
Anybody would be taken with them, and anybody would have been very turned on about the fact that they were successfully fighting the Soviets and that they were still in their mountains.
The guns of Afghanistan keep firing.
I think that when they're aroused, they're probably the world's finest warriors. They are recklessly brave. They know no fear.
This is probably the most heroic resistance to tyranny in modern history.
I was just impassioned by the resistance, and I was impassioned by the obvious, harsh terror tactics that the Soviets were using on these somewhat defenseless people. So I came back, and I spent the next 10 years of my life, every waking moment, to increasing the amounts of money and to making sure they got the right weapons.
I don't think we're doing as much as we could and as much as we should and as much as they're entitled to.
And at that time, this is really important, that most people saw the Afghans as simply wild men with swords in their teeth. And people were very wary of supporting the Mujahideen, supporting the Afghans. But the man who really pushed it harder than anybody else, and I had the Afghans to tell me, was Charlie Wilson.
Some of my friends gave me that Stinger, which shot down the very first Russian helicopter.
It was always my thought that if we could get them something sophisticated to be able to at least destroy the Soviet tanks and to be able to defend themselves against the Soviet helicopter gunships, that they conceivably could drive the Soviets from their land. Nobody believed that much except me and Gus Avracatos, who was my great friend, kind of a rogue CIA agent, as I became kind of a rogue congressman, perhaps. But we made it work. We made it work. And it was a great 10 years. Ended with the Soviet Army with their tail between their legs in 1989, marching out of Afghanistan, a defeated army. Unbelievable.
And what he did was convince Congress back in the 80s to provide several $1 billion worth of weapons to help what were then called freedom fighters drive the Soviets out of Afghanistan. And it worked.
We started out in 1979 with $5 million. We ended up in 1989, 10 years later, with something in excess of $2 billion.
Wilson says America is making the same mistake it made before. He warns that if the U.S. doesn't help the Afghans to rebuild their society, the country could easily descend into another civil war and be taken over again by terrorists.